The great Connor Bedard gets named the NHL second star of the week, while the Blackhawks best the Sharks for their fourth win in the last 6 games. I'll be getting into all of that and plenty more right here on Locked On Blackhawks.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome on into another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Can go and give me a follow on X at Jack Bushman2, and make sure to also go and follow my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. And as always, if you're watching this on YouTube, just a quick reminder to please go and hit that like button, comment down below, and subscribe to the Locked On Blackhawks YouTube channel, all that good stuff. If you're tuning into the audio version today, make sure to be constantly downloading all of those latest episodes. You can rate and review the show as well. That also helps me out tremendously. And I also got to let you know, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make sure to sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 worth of bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. Hope everyone out there had themselves a lovely St. Patrick's Day weekend. I know I certainly did. Voice is a little bit rough due to the immense amount of yelling that I was having to do, given all of the people that were down in Chicago along with me over the weekend. It was a good time. I really enjoyed myself. As I mentioned, I hope all of you did out there as well. And a couple of games over the weekend for our Chicago Blackhawks, starting on Friday night with a matchup against the Los Angeles Kings, as the Hawks were looking for 3 wins in a row for the first time this season. And believe it or not, it was only the second time that they had won back-to-back games. And on Friday's show, I mentioned it was going to be a much sterner of a test for the Blackhawks going up against Los Angeles compared to the last 2 of their opponents, which led to their offensive frenzy. The Anaheim Ducks, the Arizona Coyotes, the Blackhawks were able to pot 7 against each of those teams. It was the first time the Hawks had scored 7 goals in 2 consecutive games since 1991, but we knew the Kings were going to be much more tough. They were going to be circling and keeping an eye on Connor Bedard based on the 5-point performance that he had in the Blackhawks 7-2 win over Anaheim. And boy, they did a really good job of not only shutting down Bedard, but shutting down this entire Blackhawks offense. And it got out of hand early. I mean, one of the worst periods of the entire season from the Blackhawks in the first. Arvid Soderblom, he wasn't great, but he also got hung out to dry. Wasn't even able to make it to the end of the first period before he wound up getting pulled. The Kings race out to a 4-0, 5-0 lead there in the second period. And this one kind of felt like it was over before it had even started, which was rather unfortunate because Friday night at the United Center, the Blackhawks had some good mojo going in their last couple of games, and it was a pretty good turnout, as it always is on the weekend at the United Center. Just more credit to all the Blackhawks fans that are sticking in and still taking the time to go down to the United Center on their weekends. I give the Blackhawks fans in attendance in this one a lot of credit, and I even mentioned I was watching this game with some of my buddies, and I was like, I said to them, I couldn't believe how many people were still in their seats in the late second period and all throughout the third because the Blackhawks were down by a bunch. Wound up getting shut out for the 10th time this season to snap their little mini 2-game winning streak. It was not a very good night for the Blackhawks on Friday against Los Angeles, but fortunately, they had a nice little get-right spot on Sunday taking on the San Jose Sharks, but that actually didn't get off to a very promising start either. And the first periods, even in the Blackhawks wins here in the month of March, have not been very good. That's something they're certainly going to have to be working on more next season because it's plagued them far too often here in this stretch and just all throughout the course of this season. Blackhawks found themselves down 2-0 after 20 minutes, believe it or not. And it's like, geez, are we really going to do this? Not only is this the lowly last place San Jose Sharks. And I don't mean that as a knock. The Blackhawks are right there with them, but this is also the post-NHL trade deadline San Jose Sharks that are much, much less. I guess I don't really want to use the word terrifying or anything, but a little less daunting considering that lineup is even more thin after the moves that they made at this year's deadline. So to be falling behind 2-0 in the first period was not ideal for the Blackhawks. And who else was the man to kick off the scoring? It's Ryan Carpenter, Blackhawks legend, scored the only goal for San Jose in the first meeting between these two teams that ended up going to that long, crazy shootout where now Blackhawks legend Boris Katchouk wound up with the winner. But the Blackhawks responded really well, fortunately, in the second period to give the fans a little bit of life. Philip Kurashev finds the back of the net on a nice 3-on-2 passing play, but still, going into the third, I mean, it was a rather boring hockey game between two very lowly teams. But then in the third period, the Hawks had this minute-and-a-half stretch that set the crowd in the frenzy. It absolutely saved the day, and they wound up stealing this one from the Sharks. Ryan Donato with a little bit of a greasy goal to tie up the score 2-2, and then Kevin Korchinski with a blast from the point puts the Blackhawks ahead with his fourth goal of the season. And then just 11 seconds after that, Joey Anderson with a wild sequence, a through-the-leg shot that ends up sneaking its way through somehow. The Blackhawks go ahead 4-2 in the blink of an eye. And then for good measure, Connor Bedard goes and gets his second point of the game with the empty netter to seal the deal, his 21st goal of the season. And believe it or not, that's actually his first empty netter. I guess I shouldn't say believe it or not. It's not like the Blackhawks have found themselves in many situations where the opposing team has their goaltender pulled, but nice to see Bedard get one of those because we know he's had 3 or 4 removed due to offsides this year. So nice to get one of those back on the stat sheet for Bedard. A 2-point night for him. Philip Kurashev and Tyler Johnson with the assists on the empty netter. 2-point nights for each of those two guys as well. And the Blackhawks in comeback fashion, once again, it's kind of been their mantra here over the last couple of weeks. Erase that early 2-0 deficit to beat the San Jose Sharks 5-2. It's actually their fourth win in the last 6 games. It's been nice to see the Blackhawks take advantage of this weaker stretch in their schedule. After February was really an opportunity to get right. They went on that brutal stretch prior to the All-Star break where I believe they were shut out 3 times in 4 games. But they just couldn't take advantage of all the home games that they had there in the month of February. But nice to see them playing some good hockey here in March. They absolutely deserve it. Fans absolutely deserve it as well, the ones that were in attendance to get to see this win. And I've mentioned, I really do believe that the Blackhawks want to be playing better hockey here down the stretch of the season. I know this win and how they've been playing recently is costing them position in the standings a little bit. I'll get there in just a second. But I still think it's worthwhile. And at the end of the day, you're still going to have to win the draft lottery to get Macklin Celebrini. So I think it is more important to the Blackhawks, to the organization, to the guys in that locker room that are going to be back again next year along with this coaching staff to go into the offseason with their heads held high and some good momentum and a reason to believe that next year is going to be better. I think that's more important personally. So nice to see the Blackhawks take advantage of some of the other bottom feeder teams in the league. And it's kind of what I thought they were going to be this year. I envision them still being a bottom 10 team in the NHL, but when they're healthy, I really don't think they're the worst of the worst. And it's nice to see them getting a little bit healthier, playing some better hockey here. Hopefully that will continue a little bit more frequently down the stretch of the season. But after his 2-point game last night, Blackhawks fans, Connor Bedard was named the NHL's second star of the week. He recorded 7 points in 3 games of action. And what's pretty crazy is one of those 3 games was the Blackhawks 5-0 blanking to the Los Angeles Kings on Friday night. So really only in 2 games worth of action, Connor Bedard racks up 2 goals and 5 assists for 7 points. And he also, of course, became just the 5th 18-year-old in NHL history to ever record a 5-point game in that win over Anaheim. So Connor Bedard continuing to give us reasons to be high on him despite it being such a struggle of a season for the Chicago Blackhawks, continuing to do special things night in and night out. His confidence, his abilities are only growing and growing and growing, having a really spectacular 18-year-old season despite this Blackhawks team not giving him a whole lot of help alongside him, one of the worst offenses, the worst offense still in the entire NHL. And what's crazy also to me, Blackhawks fans, is for those of you who are not familiar with Jay Fresh and his accounts on social media, I highly recommend you go and check him out on X, Twitter, whatever it's called these days, at Jay Fresh Hockey, because he posts hockey cards, which give you some analytical numbers and kind of help you just get a better understanding at certain players, what they do well in particular areas, in comparison to the rest of the NHL players. And if you've been a longtime listener or viewer of the show, you know then that I'm not the biggest analytical guy, but when we're trying to grasp concepts of certain players, what they do well, what they struggle with, I like to have all the knowledge possible out there. And Jay Fresh provides a lot of good knowledge. He posted Connor Bedard's updated scorecard on X this morning, and some of the numbers in terms of where Connor Bedard ranks in the percentile and what percentile compared to the rest of the NHL players, what he's doing at 18 years old. It's incredible here, Blackhawks fans. And if you go and check out Jay Fresh's account on X, I think the picture will help you understand this a little bit more. But here are the percentile rankings where Connor Bedard sits compared to the rest of the NHL players at even strength. All of these numbers come from 5-on-5. So Connor Bedard is in the 93rd percentile in the NHL in goals at even strength, in the 92nd percentile in chances, the 89th percentile in shots, the 96th percentile in rush shots, the 96th percentile in zone entries. He's in the 87th percentile in power play war. He's in the 93rd percentile in rush offense, 90th percentile in rush contributions, the 91st percentile in shot contributions, the 87th percentile in finishing war. I mean, these are just unbelievable numbers considering he's playing on the Chicago Blackhawks. He's a young 18-year-old without a whole lot of help alongside him. It is bananas what Connor Bedard is doing, and probably terrifying to the rest of the 31 other teams in the league that he's already this good at such a young age. The only area where he's really struggled this year, Blackhawks fans, is defensively. That's kind of just where he needs to grow and being a better, more responsible two-way defensive center. The offensive side of things, the transition game, the creativity, the shots, I mean, he's got all those tools. But defensively, he does certainly still have some room to grow as well as in the face-off circle. So those are the improvements that Connor Bedard needs to be making in his game. But other than that, it has been a rather seamless transition for him to the NHL in his first season. It has been a heck of a lot of fun to watch. Congratulations to Connor Bedard for being named the NHL second star of the week after tallying 7 points and technically just 2 games of action, both of them resulting in wins for the Chicago Blackhawks. All right, those are my thoughts on the Hawks' 5-2 win over San Jose last night. Coming up in just a moment, I'll provide an update on the Slacken for Macklin standings, and I'll also discuss Lukas, Reichel, and Wyatt Kaiser being recalled from the Rockford IceHogs. But first, I need to talk to you all about Robinhood. Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match either. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. But this offer is only good through April 30th. So go and get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q 2021, validated by Radius Global Marketing Research. Investing involves risk, including loss, and limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. The 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match and must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC is a registered broker-dealer. Segment 2. The only downside of the Chicago Blackhawks defeating the San Jose Sharks 5-2 last night and having now won 4 of their last 6 games is it's doing them a little bit of damage in terms of the slacking for Macklin standings. And I've mentioned this has become a talking point of the show over the last couple of weeks, with this being the only race that the Blackhawks are involved in until the regular season comes to an end. I've mentioned that following the NHL trade deadline, in which we saw the San Jose Sharks trade a couple of different players, most importantly, Tomas Hertl to the Vegas Golden Knights, which was absolutely bananas, maybe the biggest move of the trade deadline, and it came as a buzzer beater as well. Following all those moves and the Blackhawks getting healthier, the Hawks have their easiest stretch of the entire season coming up on the schedule. It's just hard to not give the San Jose Sharks the edge in terms of who's going to finish in last place when the regular season comes to a close. And now that the Blackhawks have beat them in both meetings so far this season and have been playing some better hockey here to kick off the month of March, it really seems like San Jose is going to be tough at this point in time. They're currently 4 points back of the Blackhawks. They have a 4-point cushion for dead last in the NHL standings. They currently sit at 39 points through 67 games with a .291 points percentage. They also technically hold the tiebreaker because the Blackhawks won the season series, which will wrap up this upcoming weekend in San Jose when the Blackhawks close out their 3-game West Coast road trip. But after the win last night, the Hawks now have 43 points through 60 games of action this year with a .316 points percentage. The Anaheim Ducks still kind of in the mix. They're actually only 6 points ahead of the Blackhawks, but still could be some pretty solid ground that I think will be hard for the Blackhawks to cover, given that they only have 14 games left on the schedule now. That is pretty wild to say. But the Ducks, are in 30th. They have 49 points through 68 games with a .360 points percentage. So San Jose certainly has a stranglehold over things right now. But like I mentioned earlier, you still got to go and win the draft lottery. And it's anyone's game at that point in time. It went the Blackhawks' way last year. Who's to say it can't happen again for the Macklin Celebrini Sweepstakes? I know that would make a lot of Blackhawks fans out there super happy. And what a future that would be with Connor Bedard and Macklin Celebrini headlining the next era of the Chicago Blackhawks. A man can only dream. But I also wanted to be sure to mention that a couple of roster moves were made over the weekend by the Chicago Blackhawks. The first one being Lukas Reichel coming back up, and honestly, this was a bit of a surprise to me. And if you tuned into Friday's episode, I gave a little bit of an update on what was going on with the IceHogs and what had been going on with Lukas Reichel since he got reassigned back down there. And I talked about how, he had 7 points through 9 games, 1 goal and 6 assists, was looking solid, but I personally just would have liked to see him maybe have an uptick in the goal scoring department. And I just thought they were going to give him a longer stint down there. And with this being a crucial stretch for the IceHogs, I really figured that he was going to be down there for the rest of the season. I quite honestly did. So I was personally a little bit shocked when I saw Lukas Reichel get recalled back on Friday night. He wound up being in the Blackhawks lineup on the third line with Andreas Athanasiou and Nick Foligno to start the game, although Luke Richardson kind of jumbled things up a little bit throughout the course of that one. So it will be rather interesting to see who Lukas Reichel is going to be playing with moving forward, but I really hope it's Andreas Athanasiou, who the Blackhawks had playing center last night against San Jose. And if you all remember correctly, Lukas Reichel looked really sharp at the end of last season on that line with Philip Kurashev and Andreas Athanasiou playing center, even though he had never done that in his career. So I figure Luke Richardson and this coaching staff, the Blackhawks front office, are going to want to put Lukas Reichel in a position to succeed now that he is back up. I don't think he's been in a position to succeed for most of the year when he's been up here. That's another conversation for another episode. But I really, really hope they try to rekindle that flame and that fire that he had with AA last season together on the Blackhawks third line. I think that's a really good spot for Reichel to be in. And now that the Hawks are healthy, Tyler Johnson's back as well. This gives him some actually suitable line mates that fit his style of play compared to Taylor Radish, who's been going through struggles all year long. Jared Tenorti, by the way, now has more assists than Taylor Radish this season. Not very good. And then he was playing with, Mackenzie Entwistle, Zach Sanford, Brees Johnson. It's like Lukas Reichel isn't going to thrive in those positions. So I really, really hope he sticks with AA and maybe Tyler Johnson or Foligno, or hey, maybe I don't know if they want to be breaking up Bedard and Kurashev, but maybe they give Kurashev an opportunity there with Lukas Reichel as well. I thought he had a good first game last night against San Jose, picked up the assist on the game-winning goal scored by Kevin Korchinski. I thought he came with some good energy. The speed was there, especially in the neutral zone. We just need to see it consistently here down the stretch of this season. That was the biggest problem with Lukas Reichel, was the consistency. It just wasn't there on a night-to-night basis. I hope his mental is sharp to be in that right state of mind to provide those kind of consistent efforts, because that's really what he needs to do to put a stamp on this final stretch of the year. And I'll be really curious if he does well. Are they going to send him down to Rockford for the Calder Cup playoffs? If he struggles, that seems more and more likely. It's just going to be really interesting for so many different ways to see what's going to happen with Lukas Reichel here before the year comes to a close. But he wasn't the only one who was recalled from the Rockford IceHogs over the weekend. I guess technically it wasn't over the weekend. Earlier today, though, the Blackhawks announced that Wyatt Kaiser is coming back up, going to be joining the team for their upcoming 3-game road trip. And the Blackhawks, since they reassigned Isaac Phillips and Louis Crevier back down to Rockford probably over a week ago now. It was over a week ago now because it was the day of the NHL trade deadline. They've been rolling with 6 defensemen, and going out on the West Coast, they just really can't risk someone going down, and it's going to make things more difficult in terms of getting them there on time. So they're just having Wyatt Kaiser travel with them for this 3-game road trip, but gotta figure he'll probably get in there for a game or two, and we haven't seen him up in the NHL since December 19th. It's been over a 3-month stint for him down in Rockford. And, he had a outstanding training camp, a really sharp preseason. I don't want to say surprisingly, but he certainly earned his spot on the Hawks opening night roster with how he fared during camp and during the preseason, but then just kind of struggled in the early portion of the year, particularly on the defensive side of things. Didn't look all that comfortable in his own end. So no harm, no foul. They send him back down to Rockford. Ended up playing 31 games down there, tallying 15 points, 3 goals, and 12 assists. Was getting some good opportunities to play on the top defensive pairing, was playing on the power play as well, just putting him in good situations to allow him to further develop without having to face NHL caliber opponents right off the rip of his professional career, night in and night out. So I thought it was a smart move by the Blackhawks, but curious to see, what the litmus test is going to be for Kaiser. If he does, in fact, draw in during any of these 3 games out west for the Hawks, and, how that development has gone for him in Rockford over the last 3 months. And considering, it's only going to bump Jared Tenorti out of the lineup, I don't think the coaching staff is going to be too worried about that. So I would expect Wyatt Kaiser to be in the Blackhawks lineup either tomorrow night when they take on the Los Angeles Kings for the second time in 5 days, or in their next contest when they take on is it the Anaheim Ducks again on Thursday? I believe it is. So we'll see what ends up happening with Wyatt Kaiser, but not only is Lukas Reichel back up with the Blackhawks, Wyatt Kaiser is as well. We'll see if they both wind up in the lineup when the Hawks take on the Kings in LA tomorrow night. All right, there are my thoughts on the latest roster moves made by the Blackhawks. Coming up in just a moment, don't go anywhere, Blackhawks fans, because I still have to get into our Mailbag Monday fan segment. But first, I got to talk to you all about FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets, because FanDuel lets you bet on every single game of the NCAA tournament. And whether you're betting on a big upset, a big underdog like St. Peter's, or on a 1 seed like Purdue, it's time to go dancing with America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, a new customer with FanDuel can get $200 in bonus bets if their first $5 bet wins. You heard me correct. $200 worth of bonus bets if your $5 first bet wins. And that's $200 that you can use to bet on everything from point spreads, money lines, live bets, player props, same game parlays. You can even pick on who's going to win it all. So go and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon right now to bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets again. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Once again, if you're watching this on YouTube right now, if you're still tuned into this point of today's episode, first, let me just say thank you very much. And please make sure to hit that like, comment down below, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. If you're watching and liking what you're watching, please make sure to go and give that support. And also make sure to go and check out the new Locked On Sports Today, because Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day, plus our local experts covering every league. So go and check out Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Segment 3. Time to get into our weekly Mailbag Monday fan segment. Got a good slew of questions on tap here today. And just as a reminder, if you want to have your question answered by yours truly right here this time next week, make sure to go and drop your question in the comment section. You can DM me on any one of my social media accounts. You can email lockedonblackhawks@gmail.com, or you can even throw it in the community tab on the Locked On Blackhawks YouTube channel. I really enjoy doing this segment week in and week out, but it can't be possible without the viewers and the listeners out there, all you good folks going and asking your questions. So make sure to go and do that, and I'll answer them right here live on the show next Monday. First question that I wanted to get into comes from @CW312W on X, who asked, do you think Gavin Hayes has a chance of making the roster next season, or more than likely going to marinate in Rockford? Yeah, I think Rockford is more than likely where we're going to see Gavin Hayes start his professional career. Going to be really interested to see if he's going to get any opportunities with them, though, once his junior season comes to an end with the Sioux Greyhounds, where, by the way, he has just been a man on fire since getting dealt from the Flint Firebirds. Looks like he's going to pot 40 goals for the second consecutive season in the OHL, and he signed an ATO with the IceHogs at the end of last season. Didn't end up getting in any action or anything, but I feel like maybe the Blackhawks organization just wanted him around the professional scene and practicing with them a little bit. I'm not even really all that sure if he did so, but I think that's just a pretty solid indicator that that's likely going to be the next step for Gavin Hayes whenever he does elect to make that leap to the pro scene. I would just expect it to be in Rockford, given that, and also the Blackhawks really being patient with all their prospects. Like, I still think we're going to see a good number of big name guys playing in Rockford next year. Wouldn't even be surprised if we see Frank Nazar playing Rockford next year. And I mentioned this during Mailbag Monday last week. I don't think it would be the craziest thing in the world if we see Kevin Korchinski down there at some point. I don't think it would be the end of the world. I'd obviously love for him to just thrive and never play in the AHL in his career, but I just don't think it's out of the cards entirely. So Rockford has just become such a focal point for this organization. Once again, I think Gavin Hayes is absolutely going to end up there first. Next question comes from @StoleItBreezing, who actually asked this for last week's show, but got the question in literally as I was recording. But they asked, what do you want to see from the Blackhawks with a quarter of the season remaining, and what should Hawks fans see from Landon Slaggert on the ice this season? So like I said, this was obviously asked before Landon Slaggert ended up making his debut. But the biggest thing I want to see out of the Blackhawks is just some progress here, right? We haven't been able to see that for the majority of the season, and a lot of that's been due to injury and just a lot of series of unfortunate events, quite honestly. Connor Bedard even missed some time, right? But now that they're really starting to get everyone back for the most part, and think about what it even could be with Taylor Hall and a Connor Murphy. But it feels like the Blackhawks are getting some good momentum here. And I really believe the focal point right now is ending the season on the right foot and generating some momentum to head into the offseason. So that's really what I'm looking for out of this team in these final games. But what should Hawks fans see from Landon Slaggert on the ice this season? I know he hasn't made necessarily the biggest impact in his first two games, but speed, hustle, tenacity, good energy guy who doesn't quit on the plays, a 200-foot player, will go to the paint, go to the dirty areas, score a lot of goals that way. He's a bottom six type of guy. I think he's going to be a penalty killer one day for the Blackhawks, but providing that good power forward type of mold and good energy and playing a 200-foot game, those are really the strengths of Landon Slaggert's game. Next question comes from @LouRobertIsKing on X, who asked, any chance we see Comesso next year? Yeah, I think it's possible, but I don't think that's like the ideal plan for the Blackhawks. I think they want him to be the starter going into next season once again, building off of his first pro season, which has been, up and down for him so far this year. But I really think in an ideal world where Peter Mrazek and Arvid Soderblom don't get hurt, I think ideally Drew Commesso is in Rockford for the majority of next year, and maybe they give him an opportunity late in the season to showcase his stuff a little bit. But I do expect Mrazek obviously be the starter, and even though things haven't gone very great for Arvid Soderblom this year, still got 1 year left under his contract, and I think the Blackhawks, given that they're not in a rush still, I think it's a fine situation for them to kind of trot out Soderblom as the number 2 once again and see if there's any hopes there whatsoever for him to be even just a backup at the NHL level or whatever he is going to be. They'll have a better understanding of that. They probably know already, if I'm being honest here, but I think just to kind of set in stone what he is, they'll let him go as the backup next year. And maybe Commesso comes up late in the season, but 2025, 2026 is when I think he'll arrive full-time to the Blackhawks. At EHL4598 emailed, Jack, do you think Connor Murphy will be with the Blackhawks at the start of next season? Really good question. And I actually meant to have Cap Friendly pulled up on my phone for this one. But I think there are just some complications with Connor Murphy's contract and trading him. And I don't know if the Blackhawks want to be retaining anything in order to move him because they'll have that retention spot filled up for the next couple of years. After this season, Connor Murphy still has 2 years on his deal at $4.4 million. And I know the salary cap is going to go up, so it might be a little bit easier to move that cap hit. I think it might be easier to do when he's on the final year of that deal, and I think the Blackhawks will be more willing to use that salary retention spot. Just taking up one of those when you only get 3 for a full 2 years, it's a little bit risky, right? And maybe they have to do the same with Taylor Hall if they elect to trade him next year. Or some other guys, you just don't want to be risking that. And quite honestly, I think it's just a fine time for Connor Murphy to be showing the ropes to all these young guys who are coming in. And then when the time comes, I just don't think he'll probably get re-signed in terms of a fit and where the Blackhawks are heading. And he's going to be a little bit older. He'll be 35, I believe, at that point in time, right? How old is he? Oh, he won't be 35. He'll be 33 at that point in time. And I just think he's underwhelmed a little bit for that price tag. Given what we saw Jake McCabe still be able to do with the Blackhawks, who struggled last year, we never have really seen that out of Connor Murphy. So I think he's probably a number 4 or a number 5 or 6 defenseman on a Stanley Cup contender. And at $4.4 million, I just think there are some difficulties in making that type of trade happen. Last question I wanted to get to today comes from at Isaac Guerrero 8873 on YouTube, who asked, what do you think of a 2-year offer sheet targeting young players with upside like upcoming RFAs Capo Caco, Lucas Raymond, or Adam Boquist? While Chicago is the cap space and the teams that own those players are cap challenged, are there any other players that we could offer sheet that could provide immediate contributions next season and possibly become long-term members of the rebuild? So the one thing I will say about offer sheets, they're very rare and we see them every now and then, but it kind of puts you in bad standing with like another GM. It's a little bit of a dig, or pardon my French, is just a little bit of a dick move, quite honestly. Not to say that it won't happen. I just don't think we should get our expectations up that it could happen. I personally would pass on Capo Caco. I certainly would pass on Adam Boquist. Lucas Raymond, yeah, that's intriguing, but I think Detroit is going to do everything in their power to make sure to keep that kid. He's very talented at a young age. Yeah, that could be worth it possibly. Someone who came to mind that I think would be intriguing a little bit is Marty Necas. I don't know if that could possibly happen with the Carolina Hurricanes in their situation, but I think he would be an interesting one. Look, I think it's possible. I just don't know we should expect the Blackhawks to make that kind of move, especially with a young general manager like Kyle Davidson. I just don't think it exactly fits the kind of style he'd be going for. And quite honestly, I think he'll be more than happy to take his swings at the stacked 2025 free agent class when he gets that opportunity to do so with all the money the Blackhawks will have in terms of cap space. So yeah, it's possible. I just wouldn't get my hopes up on that front. All right, that is going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, Thank you all again for tuning into the show. Be sure to go and subscribe to the Locked On Blackhawks YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. And also go and follow the Locked On Blackhawks podcast wherever you may be listening to your podcast. And that way you can get the latest episode as soon as it becomes available each and every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can give me a follow on X at Jack Bushman2. You can also go and check out my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. And hell, go and follow the Locked On Blackhawks page on X as well, as we're starting to creep towards 1,600 subscribers. Till the next episode, folks, everyone enjoy the rest of your day. That's going to do it here for the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.